What's up, YouTube? It's your boy JP's on the keys, and there's two easy about the video today. If you wonder why my audio kind of sounds like this, it's because I don't have my microphone. I left it at somebody else. I left it at my people's house. I'm going to get it today, but I figured I need to record some videos because I need some content out. So we're gonna look at the newest epic history video, Apollo Program Part 1: Tragedy to Triumph.
1961, at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. Just weeks later, the United States launched its first astronaut, Alan Shepard.
0.5 cabin, oxygen go, all systems are go.
He was welcomed home as a hero. But President John F. Kennedy knew that if the United States was to overtake the Soviet space program, it needed a bolder mission.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Man, first of all, for RIP JFK, the United States government did you completely dirty. I'm not even trying to be funny. The U.S. government did you so dirty. R.I.P. to you, sir. R.I.P. That's all I'm gonna say. I know. If somebody tries to bring up the fact that he cheated on his wife, I don't care. That's not my business. Bill Clinton did the same thing. It's not my business. None of my business. I'm telling you, they did him wrong. Man, they did him wrong. R.I.P. JFK though.
As Kennedy addressed Congress, the United States had just 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience. No one knew if a moon landing was even possible, let alone in just 9 years. It would be an unprecedented engineering and scientific undertaking, marked by heroism and tragedy. The incredible task of landing an astronaut on the moon would be known as the Apollo program. Before NASA could start designing a spacecraft for its lunar mission, it faced some fundamental questions about how it would send astronauts to the moon.
Bro, just think about the amount of chemistry and physics and aeronautic engineering, this is physics, chemistry, all the stuff that I hate and I do terrible at. You got to be a math magician like a mug. You got to be a supreme mathematician. I said mathematician to be able to do this stuff. Because you got to be able to calculate force, propulsion, force, acceleration, the amount of speed that requires to break the ozone layer and to break several sound barriers and how to reach Mach 1 and all this other stuff. Salute to the people that are behind the scenes doing this. Salute to the people.
Perhaps the man best placed to provide answers was NASA's top rocket scientist, Wernher von Braun. Von Braun had spearheaded development of Nazi Germany's deadly V-2 rocket during World War II. It was the world's first long-range guided missile.
Whoa.
After the war, he'd been recruited by the US military to assist their own rocket program.
That's crazy. You gotta think about that, bro. We beat Germany, and then we stole all the rocket scientists. We stole all their rocket scientists. How did you come up with this technology? Just to think that people can actually develop that is ridiculous. You engineered a missile, a literal missile. The fact that people engineer literal missiles is insane, dog.
He joined NASA as the first director of its Marshall Space Flight Center in 1960. The most obvious way to complete a lunar landing was to send a single spacecraft from Earth to the Moon and back again. But a spacecraft large enough to carry all the necessary supplies, equipment and fuel for the journey would need an impossibly huge rocket to launch into space. Von Braun wanted to solve this problem by launching the spacecraft in pieces aboard smaller rockets and assembling it in orbit around Earth. But there was still the problem of landing such a massive spacecraft on the Moon's surface. NASA engineer John Hobolt suggested another option, one initially considered far too dangerous by NASA's most senior engineers. Not one, but two spacecraft would travel to the Moon, joined together. The first was a Command and Service Module, or CSM. It would provide fuel, power, supplies and living space for 3 astronauts as they traveled to and from the Moon. The second spacecraft, the Lunar Excursion Module, or LEM, would land on the Moon. It would be piloted by 2 astronauts, whilst the third stayed behind to fly the CSM. Because the LEM only needed equipment and fuel for a lunar landing, it could be small and light. The huge savings in weight meant this spacecraft could be launched on one smaller rocket. Von Braun endorsed Hobolt's proposal, but the plan was high risk. To dock and undock the 2 spacecraft, NASA would need to invent new piloting techniques and execute them flawlessly, because if anything went wrong, the astronauts would have no hope of rescue.
No, just imagine being stranded on another planet. like not even trying to be funny. How would you even, what? You're not in some random country. You're on another planet. You're not even on Earth, and you have no communication. That would probably be the scariest thing ever. You get you really have no idea what's out there. You're like one of you got to think how many people have actually went to space in the history of the world. How many people? It's a very, 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 very small pool of people who even knows what it feels like to be in a rocket, who even knows what it feels like to be off Earth, to be on a whole nother planet, not planet, another surface. You know what I mean? You're lost on a lunar surface that is not the Earth.
NASA embarked on years of pioneering research and development. The space flights of Project Mercury and Project Gemini paved the way for Apollo. Over 16 crewed missions in just 5 years, American astronauts learned how to eat, sleep, work, and walk in space. But President Kennedy didn't live to see these achievements. He was assassinated in 1963.
10 years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there. And new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
But before the Apollo program launched its first astronauts, it would face its darkest hour. This video is sponsored by Curiosity. The title use of Apollo would be a great place to go next, as it examines the immense technical challenges faced by the moonshot and the extraordinary people who overcame them. Curiosity Stream features many award-winning exclusives and originals, and all its content can be streamed to any device, so you can watch at any time, anywhere. You can sign up on your smart TV using the code EPICHISTORY to get access to this incredible range of documentaries for less than $15 for the entire year. You can also sign up using the link in our video description. Thanks to Curiosity Stream for sponsoring this video.
between 3 buildings. I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ.
The Apollo 1 crew were sealed inside their command module, conducting a dress rehearsal of the launch countdown. The test had been halted by constant communications problems, and command pilot Gus Grissom was becoming frustrated. Grissom was one of America's most experienced astronauts. He was a member of NASA's first astronaut group, the Mercury 7, who launched into space aboard tiny one-person capsules. His senior pilot was Ed White, the first American to walk in space. With them was rookie astronaut Roger Chaffee, a former spy plane pilot who flew reconnaissance missions during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So that was my one question. Like, how did you even know, like, how did you get into the space program? So I'm assuming that back then you had to be part of like the military, or you had to be in the military to be part of the space program. Basically, you had to have some type of flying experience. I mean, that's basically what it is now. You kind of have to be, I mean, you kind of have to be not like military, but you have to have a lot of like aeronautics experience. Like, just think of all the math and science. Like, you know, like it's just amazing how much like humans have been able to achieve in the amount of time that we've been here. Like, wow, like we're literally been in space. Like, dudes walking on the moon, and now they're talking about maybe by 2030 we could put some people on Mars. Now you find out it's over. I think I saw an article. It was over 100 planets that may be habitable by humans. Which is like, just think about how you like finding all this stuff. Like, this is like, what is space? It's just a big collection of stuff that's just floating in the air by gravity. But like, we don't even know half of what's in space. Like, just like we know, like I said, we know like 2% of what's in the oceans. Like, once you go deep enough where the pressure is too much, like what's down there could be some 5-headed fish we don't know about. You know what I'm saying?
Under enormous pressure to land an astronaut on the moon by the end of the decade, NASA and its contractors had rushed the design of the complex Apollo spacecraft. Even after 5 years of development and testing, it was still riddled with defects. During ground tests, astronauts struggled with coolant leaks, problems with the plumbing in the environmental system, and short circuits in the 20 miles of electrical wiring that filled the spacecraft. The crew were getting ready to resume the countdown.
Hey! Oh, it's got fire in the cockpit. Can you get him out of this? Buzz, can you read us?
Within moments, flames ripped through the capsule, killing all 3 astronauts. Precisely how the fire started was never determined. But it was most likely a spark from damaged wiring, somewhere in the lower equipment bay. The atmosphere inside the command module was pure oxygen, and in this environment, even materials that were normally fire-resistant burst into flame. Within seconds, the spacecraft became an incinerator. The design of the spacecraft's heavy multi-piece hatch made escape impossible. The inner hatch was fixed in place with 6 large bolts, which had to be manually unscrewed with a wrench. Even if the bolts could have been removed in time, the hatch opened inwards, and so it was sealed shut by the high pressure inside the capsule. The risks of spaceflight were well understood at NASA, but Grissom, White, and Chaffee did not die during a rocket launch or in orbit. They died on the ground during a routine test with help close at hand.
RIP them and RIP to those astronauts. It was the 7 astronauts who died in the Challenger explosion. RIP to y'all too. because I remember seeing a video of that. Like that's heartbreaking. That's extremely heartbreaking.
The tragedy of Apollo 1 left NASA's public image in tatters. If the Apollo program was to survive, the next mission had to be a success. After a series of uncrewed test flights, the next mission to carry astronauts would be Apollo 7. Learning from the failures that caused the Apollo 1 fire, NASA redesigned the Apollo spacecraft. The new Block 2 model had fireproof wiring and spacesuits made with non-flammable cloth. At launch, the capsule was pressurized with a safer oxygen-nitrogen mix, and its new single-piece hatch could be opened in just 7 seconds. The lunar module was still in the design phase and would be tested on later flights. The Apollo 7 crew had been the Apollo 1 backups. Like Gus Grissom, mission commander Wally Schirra had been part of the original Mercury 7 astronaut corps. Their mission was to give the new Apollo spacecraft a thorough shakedown.
5, 4, 3, 2, we have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff.
No, I know I keep pausing randomly, but I do want to look at like the training that it requires to be an astronaut, because I've seen it's a lot of anti-gravity training. Like they kind of like have to subject you to like very high G forces and see how your body reacts to it. Like that's what, I definitely want to see it, because I am curious to look at that though. Very curious.
Schirra and his crew put the Apollo spacecraft through its paces for the first time. They performed navigation exercises and practiced docking maneuvers, using their spent rocket booster as a target. Apollo 7 accomplished all its objectives. The mission was a success. The Apollo program was back on track, and its next step would truly be a giant leap. In April 1968, a CIA report suggested that the Soviet Union was about to send cosmonauts around the moon. To stop the Soviets beating America to another first, Apollo 8, originally intended as a test of the lunar module in Earth orbit, would instead be sent on a mission to orbit the moon. The furthest any human had traveled from the surface of the Earth was 850 miles. Apollo 8's crew would travel 240,000 miles from home, with no hope of rescue if their spacecraft failed. The mission commander was Frank Borman, an Air Force colonel, test pilot and aeronautical engineer. His command module pilot was Jim Lovell, who knew Borman better than most. On Gemini 7, the two men spent a record-breaking and grueling 14 days orbiting the Earth in a tiny spacecraft. Joining them was Bill Anders. His job would be to survey the moon's surface for future landing sites. Traveling to the moon required the largest rocket NASA had ever designed. Borman, Lovell and Anders would be the first astronauts to ride the mighty Saturn V.
We have commit.
Just think, like how much money did these things cost? Like just think about how much taxpayer money went into this. I mean, now I think about it, like how much taxpayer money went into this? Like, and I'm assuming all these rockets are billions of dollars in worth. Even then, like, bro, just think about all the metal required, all the wiring, all the components, all the computer components, all the chips, all the motherboards, all the processors, all the hard drives, all the communication equipment, all the antennas, just think about that. Especially, and also all the fuel, all the rocket fuel. I wonder why people
At
said
over
NASA wasted money
110
sometimes.
meters tall, it dwarfed all previous American rockets. Its 5 enormous F-1 engines burned through 500,000 gallons of kerosene and liquid oxygen in just 2.5 minutes, delivering a combined thrust of 7.5 million pounds. Second and third stages carried the spacecraft to Earth orbit and onwards to the Moon. It took the Apollo 8 crew 3 days to travel to the Moon. But they did not fly alone. Like all Apollo missions, Apollo 8 was carefully managed from the Mission Operations Control Room in Houston, Texas, popularly known as Mission Control. Teams of flight controllers operated round the clock, overseeing the spacecraft's trajectory and every one of its onboard systems. All voice communications to the spacecraft passed through the Capsule Communicator, or Capcom, a position always filled by a fellow astronaut. The flight director had overall responsibility for the mission, and the final say in every decision. When Apollo 8 reached the Moon, the crew had to fire their large SPS engine to slow down and be captured by the Moon's gravity. If the engine didn't fire for precisely the correct amount of time, Apollo 8 could crash into the Moon or be hurled into deep space. It was impossible to communicate with the crew whilst they were behind the Moon. The staff at Mission Control waited nervously for news.
I bet that room smelled like cigars, and that room was like cigars and aftershave. But just think about the communication technology to be able to communicate through space. Like, these people are over 200,000 miles away, but yet radio waves traveling that far and that far back. That's awesome, man. That's like, just seeing this technology is just like, it's awesome to look at because it's like, this stuff is amazing. You know what I mean?
Apollo 8, Houston, over. Go ahead, Houston, Apollo 8.
We've got it. Apollo 8 now in lunar orbit.
Borman, Lovell and Anders were the first humans to view the lunar surface close up. But the most incredible thing they saw was their home planet. On the third orbit, Anders captured one of history's most remarkable photos, Earthrise.
That's hard.
The image was peaceful, but 1968 had been a difficult year for the United States. The nation was bitterly divided over the war in Vietnam. Black Americans were still fighting for their civil rights. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April, and Bobby Kennedy in June. But for NASA, at least, the success of Apollo 8 brought hope. For the first time, it seemed possible they might meet President Kennedy's goal and land an astronaut on the Moon before the end of the decade.
The 60s was one of the wildest years in American history, one of the wildest decades in American history. Like, I think if I were to say probably the two wildest decades got to be the 19th of recent memory. I'm talking about got to be the 1960s and the 1940s. For 1960s and 1940s. Because, again, it's like World War II. Like, of course, everybody was the Jackie Robinson thing, and then FDR, and then you got the 60s, you got MLK, hippie movement, Beatles, British invasion, then you got civil rights, then you got moon landing, then you got the the psychedelic movement with all the drugs and all that stuff.
But the lunar module was still untested, and landing on the Moon held many unknowns. There would be no room for error.
Not at all, sir.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
All right. That's part one. I'm definitely looking forward to the next part. Thank you, everybody who stayed to watch this video. I appreciate y'all so much. I don't know why I'm clapping so loud. But anyway, thank you again. Please leave a like. Please hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Don't forget to turn on my post notifications so you do not miss an upload. Thank you. Have a great day. Be safe. I'm out. Peace.